Thomas was alone. Wow, a weird first thought to have.
That Danny Wallace won a BAFTA for his voice work in this game should not go unmentioned, but right now let's look at the writing. Thomas was alone. There's a lot of information, a lot of introduction in those first words, more than you might think. I'm John, this is Game Appreciation Society, and today I'm looking at Mike Bithell's first solo title. Thomas was alone. A weird first thought to have. First of all, we've got the name, Thomas. It's not an uncommon name, and so the player probably has some early impression of Thomas's character. Apologies to the Thomases watching, and trust me, as a John I share your pain, but the player likely isn't expecting him to be a mighty hero. Video games are present tense experiences. The player acts in the moment. The use of the past tense, was, immediately sets a more narrative tone, suggesting a linear experience and a focus on story. Finally, we have the word alone. Okay, there's a difference between alone and lonely, but given that this is Thomas's first thought, we can safely assume the latter. This provides us with a goal, setting up Thomas's character arc and hinting at one of the game's central themes. In those 3 words, we're given a basic understanding of our protagonist, his motivation, and the form the tale will take. This series is about how different puzzle platformers adapt the basic mechanics to suit their own style. Thomas Was Alone creates a very different player experience than Limbo, which we looked at in the last episode, and so I'd like to compare the two to highlight the differences. So let's watch that opening again, running side by side with the start of Limbo. Limbo is all about mood and atmosphere. The character is simply a blank page for the player to experience the world through, while Thomas, a literal blank page, is actually a character with his own thoughts and feelings. Thomas stands out on the screen, red against a background of dull slate blue, while the boy in Limbo gradually emerges from the environment, never quite leaving it. Meanwhile, Thomas has an arrow appear over him and text follows him around, both designed to draw attention to him, to show him as more important than anything else on screen. He even starts slightly off the ground so that when the player takes control, gravity will provide him some slight, eye-catching movement. Limbo then has the boy set out on a journey, sometimes disappearing behind the foreground and soon encountering his first peril, subtly introducing the game's world and themes. So in Thomas Was Alone, what are the themes and how do the early levels introduce these? Firstly, the game is about learning who you are and what you can do. The first 10 levels feature just a single character, Thomas, and each provides just a single obstacle that Thomas must overcome. Thomas's narrative naivety is used as an excuse to teach the basic mechanics of movement, hazards and respawn points to the player. Bithell even hangs a lampshade on this.
Thomas had a new theory. The world was training him. He could feel himself getting smarter.
A clever way of encouraging any board players who might be finding it a little simple to stay, to make it clear the game has a lot more to offer. The levels are numbered 0.1 to 0.10, implying that this is just a prologue, the real story hasn't started yet, and it doesn't until Thomas meets Christopher. The very first level of the game proper, level 1.1, introduces the larger theme of Thomas Was Alone: teamwork. Learning what you can do naturally progresses into learning what you can't, and hence the need for teamwork arises. Again, the characters begin off the ground, pulled down by gravity so the player is given an immediate visual clue that Christopher obeys the same rules Thomas does, that he is also a playable character. Christopher is unable to jump the wall separating him from his escape portal, but by teaming him with Thomas, the level can be solved. Every character encountered throughout the story has their own personality, and each of these is born from the character's skill set. Thomas, being the first we meet, provides us with a baseline. This is what average means in the game world. Again, I apologise to the Thomases. Having familiarised ourselves with Thomas's jump, we are introduced first to Chris and then to John, and are now in a position to understand why Chris is frustrated and John's a bit of a show-off. It's important to note here that Chris doesn't like Thomas when they first meet. This starts Chris on his own narrative arc, but also distinguishes between teamwork and friendship. Thomas Was Alone is about working together, whether you like someone or not. In fact, Most of the characters are self-absorbed. John, Sarah and Claire all feel like they are special and doing the others a favour helping them out. It doesn't matter, the game tells us, as long as you work together. Laura and James are both introduced to us with backstories of being ostracised for their abilities, and eventually learn that what makes them unique is also what makes them useful. Again, it doesn't matter, as long as you work together. Thomas Was Alone is a puzzle platformer with all of the emphasis on puzzle. Apart from early training levels feeling like an emoting Towers of Hanoi problem, the levels are at their best when the player has to discover how the many characters work together to reach their goals, and at their worst when the player has to navigate a single character around. The controls of Thomas Was Alone are clunky. It can be difficult to judge how far off a platform you can make it before the controls won't register a jump, and jumping from a moving platform often doesn't give the height a player would expect. The camera reacts slowly, and fast movement can see the player lose the character they're controlling off the screen. In interviews, Mike Bithell has talked about how his initial ideas for the game were much closer to Super Meat Boy, a quick-paced precision platformer, but by slowing everything down and switching the focus to this almost picture book approach, with the excellent narration bringing life to an assortment of rectangles, Bithell has managed to create a charming game, an uplifting tale of teamwork and sacrifice. But unfortunately, I don't feel Thomas Was Alone quite reaches the coherence and focus that games like Braid and Limbo do, for one simple reason. Limbo felt like a game that was built from the theme downwards. Like the developers began by asking a question, what does it feel like to be lonely? Thomas Was Alone is the opposite. Built first as a flash game, Mike Bithell had a collection of rectangles playing together. Claire dreams of being a superhero. John desires an audience to perform in front of, and Chris falls in love, but these personalities all emerged from the characters' movesets and are still tied to them. The characters and their stories can never rise too far above this. The clean lines and dynamic shadows are a pleasing look, but nothing about the environment art and level design implies a tale of artificial intelligences escaping a computer, nor of the importance of sacrifice. Instead, the environment is functional at best, spikes and water providing familiar hazards to platform gamers. I suspect because these hazards were designed as part of the early Flash game before the story elements began being added. Thomas Was Alone is still a game I'd recommend, and is available on PS4, PS3, PS Vita, Mac and iOS, and of course on PC. I'll leave a link to Mike Bithell's site in the description below for those who are interested in buying direct from the developer. I'd love to read your thoughts on the game in the comments, and remember to click the subscribe button here. It'll make me happy and you'll be notified when new videos by us go live. Thanks for watching.
Playing through again and looking at it with more analytical eyes, I couldn't help but notice how many times Limbo asks you not just to do things that might kill you, but to set them up yourself.